Hello, everybody, and welcome to Game Masters Under Dark, where three game masters get together to answer your questions about running tabletop RPGs. If you're new to this platform, I'm Will, one of your GMs. I'm also joined by my friends Matt and Matt. How you guys doing tonight?
Doing swell.
Awesome. Just some quick, housekeeping. If you guys are looking for an audio-only format for the show, we are on Spotify, as well as Apple and Google Podcasts. And as of last week, we are also on Amazon Music. So if you guys prefer a more audio-only format, definitely give us a look there. Tonight's episode is going to be the completion of a three-part series that we've done about world building, specifically how each of the three of us do this. We started first with Matt R. Last week was Matt H. And so tonight it is my turn. Being the newest out of the three of us to GMing, this should be interesting. Mostly because there's probably going to be questions that you guys have that I'm not ready for. So,
Yeah.
When the DM smiles, it's already too late. So let's go ahead and get started, guys. Normally it's me taking over, but who wants to go first asking questions?
Okay, I'll go first. So I know we set it up last time with where would you like to start? So I would like to start that as well. You've made a few games, so I'm curious, where do you like to start?
So for me as a new DM, one of the things I look at is like the monster manual, and try to find a mechanic or like a monster that intrigues me. I know we joked last week, we thought Matt H was going to be the mechanic guy, but oddly enough, I think for a new DM, that's a little simpler to do because it gives you a starting point of how you want your game to go. So like for me, I'm doing lycanthropy. We've talked about it before, but there's rules like in the DM's guide, in the monster manual, and like how this mechanic works. So it's not like you have to make something up out of the blue. You actually have something to work with, as well as the myriad of other tools that are in there for building towns and cities and naming things. I feel like being new, using the books a little more has aided me with at least starting my world. So I would say if you're new, you should have the books at least. Give them a look. You'll be surprised what catches your eye. And talk to your friends. I've done that with you guys. I implemented a chase in a side session I did with Matt H's character in Waterdeep Dragon Heist because he mentioned chases, and I was like, that seems really cool. So I looked it up in the DMG, Dungeon Master Guide for those who don't know, and I ran it. I don't know, it seemed pretty fun to me at least.
I enjoyed it.
I've set up a recurring villain now just specifically for his character. So I think using the tools you have and will take some of the pressure off of you. You don't have to just think of it right off the top of your head.
Okay. Is there a specific monster mechanic that comes to you that you would want to try to make a world off of that you haven't recently?
Oh, I do like. I know you kind of dabbled in this with Art Halden, but the idea of like mind flayers or the intellect devourers, which we did run into in Dragon Heist. The idea of a character being possessed, I guess you could say, even whether it's a specter, a ghoul, ghost. I think that kind of a mechanic would be fun to work with, simply because now I have to work with the player on that, but it's one of those things where it's an interesting thing that nobody else knows about. So it's like you're cool 90% of the time, but there's that 10% chance where, dude, what happened there? And maybe maybe you don't know. It seems like possession seems kind of cool. I like that aspect. But we'll have to wait and see. I don't see the mechanic too much in the monster manual. That's just something more for me that I would like to try.
So when it comes to this world building exercise, what we're doing, do you want to
Mhm.
make a world where possession is a thing, like
Yeah,
in your story?
yeah, I'm off the top without getting too into. I'm not the most religious individual, but I am more of a historian. So, like going into the history of like exorcisms is extremely fascinating to me. It's something that I just enjoy researching. I don't know why. So I think that's why
It's
it's
rad.
yeah. So I think how using that as a mechanic of yes, in D&D you can have demons and devils on your plane of existence. That is a thing. But how does that look when it's more subtle? When it's not as in your face necessarily? And you can look at something like The Exorcist, obviously, when Linda Blair was slowly taken over by that demon, that kind of idea of we did this in the very first game that Matt HDM'd for me, where I was attacked by some birds, and next thing you know, my character, he was like, roll a d20, and I don't remember for the life of me the name of the character I was turning into, but it's the same kind of
Indigo.
Wendigo. That's yes, thank you.
Oh,
Yeah. So
that's cool.
but this kind of slow build, the slow transformation into something
Oh,
other
that's
than
rad.
I like the idea of that. And you could essentially make that player, your big bad.
So when it comes to that, I don't know if Matt, do you want to add on to that? Because I got next thing.
No, I've got my own course of questions that
Okay.
I'm gonna ask. So you can
So
go ahead.
Matt, or sorry, Will. So that's cool. I like that idea. I don't think I've seen that done too well, or I shouldn't say too well, too much is what I was going for. But the idea is, or my question is, so if you got that possession idea there, someone changing to be something or being taken by something, um, what would your next step be if say that's the monster mechanic that you're looking at in the monster manual to build a world?
I
Where would you
think
go from next?
Yeah, I think then I would have to decide, do I want this to be, like I said, like a player, like maybe work with somebody one-on-one, and I've seen this mentioned in some of the stuff for the were creatures, that they don't necessarily get like their strength increase right away, or they don't get certain things right away. It's like at level 5 you get this, at level 10 you get this, and like it's again it's that's kind of what drove me to the possession idea in the first place. And if I'm not going to do a player, do I want to just make it like a king, or a prince maybe? um Maybe there's a druid or a shaman that gets involved. So it's figuring out who's going to be the target of
So
said
it's kind of
possession.
like setting up NPCs that are related to this monster.
Potentially, yeah. And if it is going to be a player character, that's just a simple like, hey Matt, let's sit down and discuss this real quick.
Hmm.
One, have a second character ready, uh, and but if it is going to be an NPC, um, how high up the chain does it go? Like I said, is it something in a small town, and the kingdom is moving into, I hate to use the phrase because of the times, but to quarantine everybody. Like this can't leave this area, and we're here to stop it, kind of a deal. So you have to decide at that point the scope of your continent, your world, your town, cities. That's kind of where I go next, kind of like what Matt was talking about last week. I want to know the mechanics first, how this is going to work, because it's going to depend. Like a possession thing, you could bring in an army, that's cool, now everybody's possessed. Now
Right.
there's a demon with an army. So kind of knowing how you want that to work first is big for me in setting up everything else.
Okay. Matt, what do you got for questions?
So, quick side note. Excuse me. From what you were going with, Will, sort of continue along that thinking process. One, this campaign sounds really cool. If we go through the possession route,
Yeah.
I can definitely see it leaning to more of like an Inquisition route, where a church of some deity would be very prominent. If you wanted to go with something a little bit more unusual than just your standard demonic possession, definitely introduce diseases that have similar effects. And then with the whole quarantining thing, and if you didn't want to make it incredibly overtly religious, or like didn't want to go the Inquisition route, you can make it to where it's a lot more alchemist and like plague doctor focused.
Yeah, yeah, and that's definitely where I would sit and talk with the group who I'm going to play. You know, you guys, we've discussed it before, where I'm going to sit down and talk with you guys and say, look, are there people here who are uncomfortable with, while it is in game, like religious iconography? Is that something that makes you uncomfortable? Is the thought of having some kind of priest of one of the gods that's there, does that make you uncomfortable? Because if it does, cool, I would probably then go more the plague doctor route. But growing up in the southeastern United States, religion is hard to avoid, so that's much more my wheelhouse, which for setting up something like this would be more comfortable. But at the end of the day, I'm not going to force somebody to play something they don't want to play. So, and plague doctors are cool. I mean, I can say that now with hindsight. I guess the plague wasn't cool, but the idea of plague doctors and things like that, a lot of people like that aesthetic. So it would be very easy to adapt a game to that.
Okay.
So yeah, I like both of those ideas.
So one of the questions that I had, excuse me, I can't seem to clear my throat for some reason. When it comes to Matt and I's world building approaches, we sort of have different philosophies when it comes to the player characters, where Matt sort of uses his players' backgrounds as sort of like building blocks for the overarching world itself, where I sort of already have a pre-built world and figure out where I can sort of slot in player backgrounds. I might have to move some stuff around and change some stuff, but I basically go into a game with a more pre-generated, pre-built world, where I will say that one of Matt's strengths is he definitely involves players a lot more than I do in world building. I guess what would your route and take on that? Where would you fall? Are you more of my line of thinking, more of Matt's line of thinking, or like some hybrid between the two, or something completely different?
Well, I would say I probably lean more to yours in that I like to have my world kind of set up. But that being said, I know, like, even in a pre-generated campaign, when we added Matt's character who's a chef, I was just like, cool, you guys are in a tavern and he works there. Like, I feel like one of my strengths is that I have the ability to more do things on the fly. Like, I don't necessarily need to know your background right away. I need to know, what do you do and how do you do it? And okay, cool, I can make that work. I've kind of done that with everybody that I've just thrown into a campaign, because one, that feels more organic to me. You know what I mean? Unless it's a setting where you guys like grew up together, like, then I'm gonna sit like, okay, I need to know, like, okay, you guys may have grown up together. Are you guys like friendly rivals? Do you guys hang out because you just have no, like, there's no other kids around, which is a very big possibility in the game I'm making now. Are these two best friends? Do they hate each other? What do you guys think about this, that, and the other? I think a lot of it just depends on the setting for me, because that's going to depend on, like, for you guys at this lycanthropy game, I'm going to need to know your backgrounds, mostly because, one, it's very specific and streamlined for how I'm doing things. So it's going to be very strict, like, hey guys, you can be kind of any race you want, but just know it's going to be a little odd. but how do you guys know each other? Kind of a thing. Like you grew up together, so you need to know how you know each other, and I need to know what that group dynamic is like. And because there's so few, you guys are, spoiler alert, going to be playing like teenagers, like 18, like 17, 18. There's going to be a lot of drama, and there's not a lot of kids your age. Like it's just you guys. So
Okay.
so the dynamic, like who gets along with who, is very important. And it's going to be harder to introduce somebody who wasn't there at the beginning into that kind of a game, because now I have to, like, depending on where you guys are at in the world, I have to make it make sense for that. So it's a lot of work on me, but I like to do both. So
Okay.
it really just depends on the setting that I go with.
Okay, so how far in the world building process do you think you're ready? Because if they're giving you backstory, like, did you want to try to implement that right away? So do you need some more time to create a world, or do you just want to jump in and kind of improvise?
Like for right now, I've kind of got a map. I've got names of cities, and towns and stuff like that. I have the specific creatures you guys are going to run into, at least the big ones. But because a lot of this is taking place in, like I said, in like a small area, I would definitely like more want your guys' background before we started, because if that's gonna set up a lot down the line as far as like I might have to change a creature or two that you run into, because uh if you're very type A and you're go 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 go, okay, well there's a creature that I have in mind for that I mean, is like waiting in the wings, you know what I mean? So I can easily plug it in once I know your character's motivations, and so then I can adapt the game that way. So I'm actually relatively close. I've got one big bad guy. Unfortunately, there's several for you guys to deal with. Um, so I'm making some headway on that, but I'm definitely taking my time. It's the first time. Um, you guys know I jumped in feet first into this DM thing, was not really as prepared as I could have or should have been, but you'll learn. I
That's
figured,
all
I was
first
gonna say,
DM, so don't feel
yeah,
bad.
I was gonna say, so anybody who's afraid, I would say find a pre-written adventure. Curse of Strahd, Dragon Heist are usually considered the two best written ones, and just go. I would say don't stress homebrewing. That's what I did. It was daunting. It still kind of is. And I was just like, let me do something that somebody's already written, because it's going to be easier to learn and adapt to my style as I make mistakes than trying to come up with a world and not understand how any of it works. Now I have a better understanding. It's making my world building easier. So,
Okay.
So, sort of, you mentioned running pre-written stuff.
mhm.
When it comes to you running pre-written games, about how close to the source material do you say would you stick to it? Are you 100% like this is what the book says, like this is where you're going next? Do you make up entire sections? Do you sort of let the players decide and then elaborate off of what they want to do? I guess like where is your cutoff point when it comes to player material? What's written, the actual written material, and like official adventure versus player agency?
Um, so I like to stick to what is written. Um, I will say that right now, like you guys have done a pretty good job of embracing the story. In that I'm able to, okay, this is happening, this is happening. Okay, oh, like you guys stayed and wanted to run the tavern for several weeks. Okay, cool. I was able to incorporate kind of Ribal, the guy that you guys got arrested, and that was all cool. Like I was very easily able to do that. I think if you guys had just been like, oh no, we're not interested in running a tavern, I would have just moved on to the next thing. But by wanting to do that, it allowed me to add something that was an option, and finding interesting ways to make it work. You guys adding another player who was able to speak to animals in the form of being a druid definitely was like, oh, that changes how I'm going to introduce these guys.
Mhm.
But I don't think you guys knew that until just now that I was not prepared for that. I was just like, yeah, cool. She talks to animals like this. This is how this is gonna work. And I was able to leave enough breadcrumbs that you guys could figure out the identity of the people involved and go from there. So I think it just depends on the group. This group though is really, you guys are really good about letting me stick to the source material, but still challenging me in a way where it's like, "Man, this is not in the book. I don't know." Uh, and I think that's where just reading ahead and knowing where the story is supposed to go comes in. Um, you know, I read whatever chapter or section I'm in. I read far enough ahead that I'm like, okay, we have a lot of shenanigans, so we're not going to get as far as a lot of groups in a 3-hour game. So I'm like, I know we can get to about here. I need to know just enough to lead you guys there for the next session. So, it just depends on the shenanigans, I guess. But I do try to stick close to what's written.
Okay.
Do you, when it comes to larger ideas of, we talked about religion into your world, do you think about that at roughly around the same time you thought about your villain, or because that's what, or the monster and its position idea, going to that example again, or is that further down the line? Because that could set up quite a bit of a world.
Yeah, so I definitely look at it in terms of the big bad. I think that's important because like writing your own PC's background, that is a part of their background. So if I'm going to make I think I told you guys that a little bit because you guys are good, like I said, about playing into the story anyways. My big bad uh has essentially made a deal with a god, even though he, so there's like, that was a part I was like, this needs to be, this is very important in the story as a whole, but his story specifically, and it's going to shape uh how he interacts with the world, both the big bad and the god. I know based on reading the wikis and everything else how they typically interact, and so I can definitely, that's easy enough to implement, but how is that going to affect you guys? How is it going to affect every facet of the game? And is there, for and there's, if there's dark, there's got to be light. So now I have to find a god to kind of be the antithesis of the bad guy. And how do they interact with you guys? How helpful are they? Are they just kind of a disembodied, like, hey guys, you're good, or are they more involved? You know what I mean? So that, to me, that's very important to figure out early on, because it's going to set the tone for a lot of how you plan.
I gotta, I guess it's vague enough to be a hard question. Um, what inspires a theme for you?
Um, a lot of it is I'm just a student of history. Um, I'm in school now, but the first time I went to college, that's what I studied, was history. I prefer American history, but up to like the Civil War and the founding of the country. That was always big. But my grandmother is Japanese, so that culture is extremely full of just different stories and boogeymen and things like that. And again, growing up in the South, my family grew up, we weren't super religious, but we were taught right and wrong via the Bible. Um, so I just like to read, and I like to have as much information as I can. Um, you guys know, because of my over preparedness, that sometimes that's a bad thing. but it's my creative process when I need a starting point is what am I going to get bored reading this material as I'm researching it? Because if I'm going to get bored, I'm not going to do it. I want to be as enamored by the research and the information I'm trying to gather for you guys as I hope my game becomes, if that makes sense. If I'm not having a good time researching this, I'm not gonna have a good time making this game. You guys are not
Yeah.
gonna have fun playing. So it has to, sometimes I'm like you, like I'll just go on Wikipedia and then like look at the front page and it'll have like news stories from the last, 50, 60, 100 years. And I'll just be like, that seems cool. And I'll just start reading about it. And I'm like, that's horrific. But I would have never known if I didn't look. So,
Yeah.
or just even the news today. I check the news about 3 or 4 times a day and I favorite a lot of articles just because I'm like, I like it might not be, the most interesting to somebody else, but for me, this is interesting and inspiration can come from anywhere. So I'm going to hold on to this for a rainy day and maybe use it for something.
Right. That's why my whole entire bookmark catalog in my computer's like massive and unorganized. So that's what I do.
Dude, same.
Unorganized, I am not. I have folders for my bookmark bar. Unorganized, I am not. But that's a difference in our styles. It works for you. Your style works for you. Mine works for me. I think that's the beauty of playing this game or any tabletop game is the source materials are there, whether it's a Dungeon Master's Guide, Player's Handbook, whatever version of whatever game you're playing, that's all there. But at the end of the day, it's your imagination. I've told you guys before, I'm not the most creative person, so I have to read the books. I have to research these things because otherwise I won't get anywhere. But that's cool. The material is there for me to use, and I take full advantage of it. So,
Very cool.
that's
Uh,
kind of my thing.
Question. So, say you're making a game, and this
Mhm.
sort of incorporates session 0 actually into world building.
Mhm.
Say you're making a game, and it has a very heavy spider focus to it. Maybe Lolth is the main antagonist. The cultists are trying to turn people into driders. Very arachnid.
Okay.
And during a session 0, one of your players brings up like, hey, I have severe arachnophobia and I don't want any spiders or driders or anything like that in my game. When it comes to your world, would you try to accommodate that and move some things around, maybe change the god, maybe the cultists are turning them into, like war forges, and there are different type, maybe they're like occult to mechanists or something like that? Or would you ask that player to be like, hey, I sort of already planned this, so unless anybody else is going to run, this is the world that I've already built, you don't have to play in it if it makes you uncomfortable? Or is there some sort of compromise in the middle that you would try to reach with that player?
I think the setting would depend on that. So if I'm very much doing like an Underdark kind of thing where the Drow and Arachnid, Spider Queen, that's kind of hard. Like, man, I've already got this. We're gonna have to figure something out. Whereas if it's like, you could still use that, but like above, in the normal day-to-day world, there's enough gods that have enough people that worship them that I feel like I could like, okay, hold on, we might have to push the game back a couple weeks, but like you said, I could plug and play. One of the I think it's the Essentials kit actually has that where one of like the main bad over several stories are worshippers of Talos, the storm god. And that's kind of an over, well, I could substitute that with just about anybody. I don't know the pantheon that well, I haven't researched it, but I know that there are some gods who don't do a lot of worship, there are some that do. So it'd just be a matter of, okay, which gods like to be worshipped, and okay, cool, let's make that work. So I think it just depends on the setting, how much of a compromise there is, because I'm sure you've had this happen, if I've got a specific setting in mind and a specific creature just has to be it, that's kind of tough. So
Mm.
um I think another thing is just always having multiple games going, which is kind of what we do. And so it's like, this game's not ready. We're not going to do this because I haven't had a chance to talk to everybody about it. Um, I talked to you guys about my were creature game, pretty much just you guys, but nobody else knows really about it other than I'm making it because I'm not ready to sit down with everybody and have that discussion yet. So I think it just depends. The setting is the big thing for me.
All righty.
No.
Matt,
But-
you got any other questions?
When it comes to my cat's meowing, when it comes to setting and being what's the word, accommodating players that are like that, would you homebrew anything specifically for them to just make sure they're comfortable?
I think, like I said, I think I would try to, but there's some set, like you talked about when using certain creatures, like, if this is a water creature, we got to have water. If it's a ground, if they burrow, we got to have ground. It's kind of the same concept of if you're going to be heavily, of course, a lot of it depends on how close you stick to the lore, but say somebody is claustrophobic and you're talking about doing an exploration of a mountain with very tight spaces because maybe gnomes or dwarves live there. Like if you kind of already have that in mind, maybe you could just have, okay, maybe you guys only need to go into one really tiny oops, my phone's going off for some reason. Maybe maybe you guys need to go down one tiny hole and then it opens up to a big cavern. So it's like, hey, can you handle the one thing? You know what I mean? Even though that's not how I had it planned, maybe I was gonna have you guys traverse like almost like the ant farms. Like there's a bunch of little places. Maybe there's just one big one, or maybe you guys could investigate and find a bigger opening. So I think I would like to think I would be accommodating for sure. But like I said, sometimes it's really hard if you're especially if you're using a pre-made kind of world. That's why I kind of brought up the Underdark. Like that's got a very specific aesthetic to it. That's kind of hard to break. So, maybe avoid using something that specific.
Right.
Even though it's really cool.
Yeah. I think that session 0 should be pretty amplified, just because
Yeah.
because of all that. And then you can figure out what kind of story they want. So like if they were to change of the idea that you had from going on like a big old adventure to just doing a dungeon crawl, would your story that you would have pre-written before session 0 be able to accommodate that?
Definitely, because I always try to, again, this is the planner in me, is, and it's why it's taking so long to play to get this game set up, is I know when you guys get from A to B, there needs to be things to do. And I know that there are some people who really love the combat, Matt H, and there are people who love the RP, Matt R. And not that we don't like the other portions of it, but you have to make sure that you have a little bit for everybody. And okay, can the role playing lead to the other things? I think is an important thing as well. It's cool that I have all this role play opportunity for people who like role play, but then if the combat is you fight one goblin, that's not like I wasted everybody's time, but especially the person who wanted combat, like now you're just angry. Like you're just mad. So you have to have it make sense. I feel like they have to work together. And I know you and I talked about that, Matt R, in your session, like at least having a dungeon ready if that's what they would prefer to do. than just saying like you have to do this, because you can always put ruins somewhere. Ruins are easy to place, I feel like, in almost any world, that if they wanted a dungeon, I can give you a dungeon.
Mhm.
I know when it comes to my worlds, I like to, especially when players are like, we want combat and role playing, I try to incorporate both of them at the same time. So when it
Right.
comes to your world, and fitting everybody's wants, do you feel pressured when making a world to begin with? Is that like something that you think of right away?
I don't want to say, I do think about it, but I don't feel pressure, because I think it depends on uh on the location, like location. So if you're amongst a group of people that are, like, we'll say, to use alignment here, like lawful good, they uphold the law, great, like the most upstanding of upstanding people, the odds that like a fist fight is going to break out over something is relatively low. So I have to find a way to then introduce that conflict of something that maybe not necessarily like chaotic evil, but like I have to find a way to introduce the conflict. Maybe they're lawful good, but their village was attacked by whatever creature, or maybe there was a natural disaster and that has unearthed something, magical item, and it's causing problems and they don't know how to stop that problem. Um, and I always feel like if you are, say, more combat oriented, that's easy to set up through travel as well. You know what I mean? You're traveling along the road and goblins, bandits, that's, I mean, just for the basic examples, but I can set up a combat thing while you guys are getting from point A to point B, even if point B is not going to have a ton of combat. I can get you I feel like I can find a way to get you what you need to hold you over until it's time for more combat, or same with RP. But I also think that's partially on the group as well. How much do they buy into it? If I set up a combat situation, and maybe it's not the best thing, maybe I didn't do a good job, but I feel like that's where the input from the group comes in at the end of the session. You guys know this. I ask you guys almost all the time, like, what'd you guys think?
Mhm.
And if you're like, that combat was trash, I hope you'd be nicer than that. But but I mean, if it
A
was that
quote.
bad
That's a
and
quote from me. No.
but like, if you guys are like, I felt like that was not your best encounter. Okay, what would you have liked to have seen instead? And I feel like, as a I don't care if you're new or old, I feel like as a DM, if you close yourself off to that kind of feedback, and I'm not talking about just somebody who's like complaining to complain, like, I didn't like that. Well, why? It was just stupid. I don't like that. I'm very much, we need to solve the problem. So cool, you don't like it. What would you like to see next time? And that seems kind of crass, but I don't like people who complain just for the sake of complaining. I'm doing this for you guys. So if you don't like it, tell me what you want.
Mhm.
And you can't always accommodate, and you guys know that you can try, you can't always, but I definitely can't do it if you don't say anything. So I'd rather you say something, and even if I'm like, oh, okay, at least now I know next time I can do better by doing this instead, and that will make me a better DM and a better player ultimately, because now I have an idea of how these things should work and what I can do next time I'm not running a game. So I feel like feedback is important. So DMs, I don't care how long you've done this. These guys are great about it. Like, they ask questions. Feedback is key. You got to know what's going on.
Yeah. I know when a character doesn't give you backstory, do you try to put these put like some story to them? Like try to contextualize a little bit of their backstory? How would you go about that?
So one of the things that I learned from you actually, Matt, was that list of like questions you can ask at a session 0. And I know I did that when at least the initial group for Dragon Heist, I sat down and did that. But there's still one of the players who didn't necessarily give me like a ton to work with. It was all very much kind of the same, whereas Matt gave me a lot to work with his character. And so I think if again, I think I'm pretty good at like off the cuff throwing things out there. So if you're not going to give me something, um, I'll throw it out there, see if it sticks. And if you don't like it, cool. We'll talk about this after the session. And as adults, try to figure out like, okay, you didn't like this, but I don't have anything to work with. So can we maybe work on something and we'll come back to it, later, maybe next week, maybe in a couple days, and we'll sit and talk about the ideas you had for your character. Because I don't like to throw things at some people necessarily, but I feel like there does come a point when like it's a game of make believe, but you have to have make believe goals, family, friends, or if you don't have them, why don't you have them? That's just as important as having them. That's why I love, and I told you I talk about it ad nauseum, I think, but in Xanathar's Guide to Everything, there's a section called "This Is Your Life," and it's a bunch of tables you can roll on that give you like it even starts with the very first thing is, do you know your parents, yes or no? Because a lot of people go with the orphan background. I mean, not everybody's an orphan.
How many damn orphans do you think are out here?
Right. And so I use that table with every character I've made since I've got the book. And if you were to go into D&D Beyond and look at my character backstories, like you can tell, like with your game, Art Halden, I didn't have the book. So my character's background was like really made up on the fly. But like the character for Matt H's game that he's doing, kind of the Mad Max style game, go look at that character, and I basically have like a 2-page essay on my dude's background. Now, when introducing my character to you guys, am I going to give everybody all of that? No, I'm going to pick out the things that are important and leave some of that behind as my character building throughout the story. But it gives me something to work with. Like I got 9 siblings in your cowboy game, man. I told you I got 9 siblings. Let's do something with that. You know what I mean? Like I got all that from that table. I'm the oldest of 9. There's 10 of us. Like there's got to be something there. So I feel like if you're not super strong in that kind of background, I roll on the tables. It gives me the info, but then I write it out as like, here's my parents' names, here's this, that, and the other. I really, I take the time to embellish upon it. It's just something to get me started. And each character is different. That's kind of a nice part too. So they're not always the same. So try to use your resources as best you can. But if at the end of the day they're not going to give me something to bring it back, if they're not going to give me backstory, I will just throw something out there. And kind of go see where it goes.
Do you have a question, Matt?
I was actually going to ask a time question.
We're past the time. I stopped the timer forever ago. I don't even know where we're at right now.
Oh.
This is the long episode, everyone.
Yeah, this is your guys' one. We're trying to do one a month, super long episode. It looks like this one's it for September. But yeah, I mean, do you guys have any other questions? Or I mean, I'm sure we all talk about this all the time. So
right.
I think that's about it. I mean, I feel like based off what you said, when it comes to focusing on a monster, not even necessarily the big bad, if that's what you're focused on, but just a monster and how it is reflected into the world, then building it to your NPCs. Those are things we've talked about on the show before. And like with the big bad guy, then I know with my episode, I talk about creating NPC first, that kind of thing. And then like you you would naturally expand on those ideas, like whether it's a king or a villager, you would expand on those. And then we talked about religion and stuff. And I feel like that, those kind of concepts, those higher concepts of what do the people believe in, that can really be like the driving force in what makes a world. Because I mean, maybe it's not like a god that they believe in, but maybe they believe in like very harsh manners. Like you have to have manners, and like then you just talk about like why, and then that would build a world from that. And so that's great. And then of course players input. So I feel like you stepped on a lot of things that we've talked about, but you do it in your own way, and definitely for my standard, way more intricate than what I would go into.
Yeah, that's the, yeah, like I said, that's the historian in me. I research, and part of that is picking apart what is relevant and what isn't, and ultimately making it fun. I know I talked to you guys, and you guys are like, no, that's a cool idea. All right, cool. I was on the fence about it, but if you guys like it, it's ultimately your game, so we're going with it. So, yeah, I've said it multiple times, but for any new DMs, like I said, just talk to your players. We say it every week. Session zeros, which I know we've talked about. I think doing an episode on that, and like how, and we've talked about exactly how important that is. But just feedback, man. Be willing to take it and don't take it personal. I think that's the hardest part for a lot of people, but if you really want to play this game long term, whether it's a player or a DM, don't take it personal, unless somebody's just being super rude about it. And hopefully you don't have a group like that. Oh, Bean's first appearance on the show. Hi, Bean.
I feel like she's been in the background before.
Might have been. That's my first official.
She was invisible there for a second. You were petting her, and it looked like you were just petting the air for a second.
It did.
Yep,
it did.
just like that.
There you go. But all right, guys. Well,
close.
If that's it, we'll anything else before we we wrap up the show tonight?
I think you made your world.
All righty, guys. Well, we hope everybody enjoys this a little bit longer episode. We're gonna try to do like one of these a month where we have a little bit longer, more free form format. It just so happened these guys they wanted to grill me a little on being the newbie in world making, and I really did enjoy it. All joking aside, it did give me a lot to think about. So I appreciate that, and I hope this gives everybody else something to think about as well. As always, if you enjoyed the episode, like, comment, subscribe. We're going to keep putting these out one video a week. Remember, you can find us all over Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon now. We do also have a Patreon up and running. So if you'd like to support the show in other ways, check that out as well. And we will see you guys next week. Everybody have a great weekend.
Yeah.
Everybody.